The observation deck of the Krynathi research station hung in the black void between distant stars, like a tiny spark of life in an ocean of death. Commander Velcor stood with his 4 eyes fixed on the window before him, watching the absolute emptiness of space that stretched forever in all directions. For 300 cycles, the station had floated here in Dead Zone Epsilon 7, a region so empty and lifeless that most species avoided it completely. The Krynathi were different, though. They were watchers and recorders, patient beings who documented everything the universe had to show them. They had seen stars being born and dying. They had mapped strange things that broke the laws of physics, and they had catalogued over 6,000 different species that could travel between the stars. But they had never seen anything like what was happening now. Science Officer Thrain worked at her station with all 4 of her hands moving rapidly across the controls. Her skin had turned pale with worry as she called out readings to her commander. The instruments were screaming warnings at them, telling them that space itself was being torn open right in front of their station. A crack of blue energy appeared in the void, growing wider with each second that passed. The station's protective shields came online automatically, filling the observation deck with amber warning lights that made everything look dangerous and urgent. Then the ship came. Through the tear in space, Velcor had seen thousands of different ship designs in his long career, from the elegant curves of the Altheri pleasure craft to the massive bulk of Corvin mining vessels. This ship was nothing like any of them. It was all sharp angles and brutal efficiency, built for function rather than beauty. The hull was covered in scorch marks and impact craters that told stories of terrible violence. One entire section looked like it had been blown apart and then sealed up again with metal plates that didn't match the rest of the ship. No lights shone from its windows, no power signature registered on their sensors. It was a corpse tumbling slowly through the void, dead and silent. Velcor gripped the command rail tightly with his primary hands. His voice was calm despite the shock he felt. He ordered Thrain to scan the vessel with every sensor they had available. The computers worked for several long minutes, analyzing the strange ship from every possible angle. When the results finally appeared on the holographic display, Thrain's skin shifted to the pale blue color that meant complete shock and disbelief. The ship was impossibly old according to its design, using construction methods that predated even the earliest spacefaring civilizations in the Krynathi database. The materials were primitive beyond belief, just iron and titanium and silicon-based computers. But the weapon signatures told a different story, one that made no sense at all. The scans showed that this ancient primitive vessel had survived combat with Jarn warships. Everyone on the observation deck went silent when they heard this. The Jarn Collective was the nightmare that every spacefaring species feared in their darkest moments. They were ruthless and efficient, having conquered 12 sectors of space and turned 4 living worlds into lifeless rocks. Their technology was centuries beyond most civilizations, and their way of war was built on absolute annihilation of everything that opposed them. Nothing survived combat with the Jarn. It was a simple fact of galactic life. Velcor asked quietly how long the ship had been drifting out here in the dead zone. Thrain checked her instruments carefully before answering that the radiation decay and hull erosion suggested at least 40 standard cycles, possibly even longer than that. When Velcor asked about life signs, Thrain worked her console with intense focus, pushing every sensor array to its maximum sensitivity. For a long moment there was nothing but empty readings. Then a faint pulse appeared on the display, so weak it might have been just sensor noise or interference, one life sign barely registering as alive, deep in the ship's core surrounded by what looked like a makeshift medical bay. Velcor made his decision with the speed and certainty that had earned him command of the station. He ordered a boarding team prepared immediately, with medical staff standing by to help. Whatever species had built this ship, whatever they had done to make the Jarn angry enough to attack them, they deserved better than dying alone in the dark void between stars. As the Krynathi crew rushed to execute their commander's orders, none of them noticed the small data packet that activated deep inside the derelict ship's core. It was a final failsafe system, triggered automatically by the proximity of another vessel. A message that had been waiting for 40 years to be delivered. A warning for whoever found the ship. The boarding team moved slowly through corridors that were choked with frozen atmosphere and drifting debris. Every surface they passed told stories of desperate violence and last stands. Bulkheads had been melted by energy weapons hot enough to turn metal into liquid. Blast doors were warped and torn like paper. In one section, they found the remains of 17 crew members, frozen solid in the act of defending a narrow choke point against attackers. Their primitive projectile weapons were still clutched in dead hands. The team leader, Korvath, reported back to the station with confusion and amazement in his voice. These beings had fought against the Zharn with kinetic weapons, with simple bullets and explosives. Such a thing should not have been possible, yet here was the proof frozen in front of them. The medical bay was located exactly where the sensors had indicated, deep inside the most heavily armored section of the ship. The door was sealed with a mechanical lock, another primitive system that seemed almost quaint to the advanced Krenathi. Their tools made short work of it, though, and the door opened to reveal a small room barely large enough for the medical pod at its center. Emergency lighting still flickered weakly inside, powered by a fusion cell that had somehow remained functional after 4 decades of isolation. The pod itself was remarkable, a strange combination of military-grade stasis technology that had been jury-rigged together with civilian medical equipment and what appeared to be spare parts from the ship's engines through the pod's viewing panel. They could see the survivor. The being was bipedal and similar in basic body structure to a dozen species in the Galactic Council. Pale skin, dark hair, features that might have been delicate if not for the network of scars visible even through the stasis field. One arm was missing below the elbow, the stump covered with a crude prosthetic interface. The being's chest rose and fell with the mechanical rhythm of assisted breathing. The medical officer identified her as female of the species, with extensive injuries throughout her body. Multiple healed fractures, radiation scarring, signs of prolonged malnutrition. The stasis field was the only thing keeping her alive after all these years. As the team worked carefully to disconnect the pod from the ship's dying power grid, the medical officer noticed something clutched tightly in the survivor's remaining hand. It was a data storage device, protected inside a sealed container. Velcor ordered them to secure it along with the survivor, telling them that everything else was secondary to getting her out of the dead ship and back to their station. The extraction took 3 careful hours, with the Krenathi treating the ancient vessel with the respect due to a tomb. None of them spoke as they guided the medical pod through the corridors toward their boarding shuttle, the weight of what they had seen demanding silence. After they had safely docked with the research station and transferred the pod to the advanced medical facility, Velcor finally allowed himself to examine the data chip. The Krenathi computers made short work of the primitive encryption, and what he found in the files made his blood run cold with fear and amazement. Ship logs, battle reports, and a final message recorded in the dying moments before the last crew member had entered stasis. The being on the screen was the same one now sleeping in the medical pod, but whole and uninjured, her eyes bright with fierce determination, despite the blood staining her uniform and the alarms blaring in the background. The woman on the recording spoke clearly despite the chaos visible behind her. She identified herself as Lieutenant Kate Morrison of the Terran Colonial Defense Force, giving a serial number for official record. Her message was a formal warning under the Accords of Civilized Warfare. Though she seemed to doubt anyone civilized would find her ship, she explained that the Zharn Collective had initiated hostilities against human colonies without any provocation or declaration of war. The humans had responded with everything they had. The vessel that the finder now possessed, called the TCS Defiant, was one of 12 ships that had engaged a Zharn battle fleet at a place called the Kepler 442 system. Kate Morrison paused in her recording, and Velcor could see pain flicker across her face as she spoke the next words. They had lost 9 ships in the battle, over 3,000 humans killed in a few hours of desperate fighting. But they had taken 37 Zharn vessels with them into death. The Zharn had retreated. They had run away from the battlefield. Humanity had proved that Earth does not surrender, that humans would not go quietly into extinction. Another pause followed as explosions sounded somewhere in the dying ship around her. Morrison stated that she was the last survivor, that the Defiant was lost beyond saving, but she was going into stasis with all their logs and tactical data. Everything they had learned about fighting the Zharn. If anyone received this message, if there was any justice in the galaxy, they would find Earth and deliver a warning. The Zharn would come back for revenge, but now they knew something important. Now the whole galaxy would know that humans bite back when threatened. The recording ended with Kate Morrison sealing herself into the stasis pod, her face set with grim resolve and determination. Velcor stood alone in his office for a long time after the message finished. processing everything he had witnessed. A species completely unknown to the Galactic Council. A species that had fought the Zharn to a standstill using technology that was centuries behind the current standard. Thrain entered his office without waiting for acknowledgement, her skin showing the colors of urgent news. Medical had reported that the human was stabilizing in their care, and they were attempting to wake her from the long stasis sleep. But Thrain had decoded more of the ship's database, and what she found was deeply troubling. These humans had come from a planet that was not on any known star charts. They were explorers and colonists seeking new homes among the stars. The Zharn had attacked them without warning, without mercy, without any apparent reason other than that the humans existed. Velcor finished her thought out loud, his voice heavy with the implications. And the humans had fought back with everything they had, making the Zharn retreat despite having inferior weapons and ships. A species barely capable of faster-than-light travel had accomplished what entire advanced civilizations had failed to do. Thrain asked what they should do with this information, and Velcor looked out at the derelict ship now held safely in their docking bay. It was a monument to a battle that the galaxy had never known occurred, a testament to courage and sacrifice. He made his decision with certainty. They would find Earth. They would deliver Lieutenant Morrison's warning to her people. But first they would give her the honor she had earned through her survival and endurance. That meant something important in a galaxy where so many simply gave up when faced with the Zharn. In the medical bay, monitoring equipment began to chime softly as the stasis field slowly dissolved around Kate Morrison. Her eyes moved beneath closed lids as consciousness returned after 40 years of dreamless sleep. The medical staff watched their instruments carefully, ready to intervene if the revival process caused any complications. Her vital signs were weak but stable, her brain activity increasing steadily toward normal waking patterns. The Krenathi had done everything possible to prepare for this moment, studying human physiology from the Defiance database and adapting their medical technology to accommodate an entirely new species. But there was no way to know how Kate Morrison would react to waking in an alien medical facility, surrounded by beings she had never seen before. 40 years after entering stasis, Kate woke to pain that was both familiar and new. The phantom ache of her missing arm returned first, followed by the deep burn in her lungs from old injuries. The persistent throb behind her eyes that she had carried since the third battle against the Zharn came back like an unwelcome friend. All of it rushed over her as the stasis field released its hold on her body and mind. But there were new sensations mixed with the old pain. Soft fabric against her skin instead of the torn remains of her uniform. Clean air that didn't taste of recycled fear and blood. The gentle hum of medical equipment that sounded nothing like the Defiant's dying screams in its final hours. She opened her eyes slowly and saw an alien ceiling above her. It was curved and organic in design, lit by bioluminescent panels that pulsed with a soft blue-green glow. Everything was wrong in subtle ways that her combat-trained mind immediately cataloged as threats. The gravity felt lighter than Earth standard. The air smelled of minerals and something sweet she couldn't identify, and all the ambient sounds were pitched slightly off from what human engineering produced. Kate tried to sit up, but gentle restraints held her in place. The monitoring equipment erupted in alarmed chirping at her movement. Within seconds, a door opened with an organic iris motion, and 3 figures entered the medical bay. They were not human, not even close to human. The lead figure stood perhaps 7 feet tall with 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on an elongated face. Its skin was pale gray that shifted to deeper shades as Kate watched, probably indicating emotional responses. It wore something that might have been a uniform, clean and efficiently designed. The being spoke, and Kate's translator implant struggled for a moment before successfully locking onto the alien language and converting it to English. Commander Velcor introduced himself and told Kate to remain calm, that she was safe aboard a Krenathi research station. Kate's combat training warred with 40 years of built-up disorientation and confusion. She forced herself to breathe slowly to assess the situation tactically, to think before acting. Her voice was rough when she asked where her ship was and what had happened to her crew. The way Velcor's skin shifted to a darker blue color told Kate everything she needed to know before he spoke the words. He was deeply sorry, but her crew had not survived the battle or the long drift through space. They had found her alone in stasis, the only living thing on a dead ship drifting in deep space. She had been asleep for 42 of her years, 4 decades lost to stasis while the galaxy continued without her. The words hit Kate harder than any Zarn weapon ever had. 42 years meant the war could be over. Earth could be destroyed. Everyone she had ever known could be dead or old. Everything she had fought for, all the sacrifice and pain, might have been for nothing. Kate's voice cracked as she asked the only question that mattered. Did humanity win the war? Did Earth survive the Zarn attack? Velcor exchanged glances with his medical staff before answering with careful precision. They did not know where Earth was located. The human species was not recorded in any Galactic Council database. They had found her ship by chance, drawn by a spatial anomaly in the dead zone. But they had recovered her logs and her warning message, and they would find Earth to deliver that warning. Kate laughed at this news, but the sound came out bitter and broken. They didn't know where Earth was, which meant the Defiant had jumped blind through Zarn lines with a damage faster than light drive, and ended up God knows how far from home. It was perfect in a dark way. The universe's sense of humor remained cruelly intact even after 40 years. She closed her eyes against the despair that threatened to swallow her completely. 42 years meant everyone she loved would be middle-aged or dead by now. The Defiant's crew who had died holding corridor after corridor against Zarn borders. They had been gone for longer than Kate had known some of them alive. The friends she had made in the Colonial Defense Force, the family she had left behind on Earth, all of them lost to time even if they had survived the war. Velcor spoke gently, trying to offer some comfort in the face of her obvious pain. He told her that they had studied the ship's logs carefully, that they had analyzed all the battle data she had preserved. What Kate and her crew had accomplished against the Zarn fleet was being recognized as one of the most significant military achievements in recorded galactic history. Kate's response was flat and harsh. They had lost the battle, 9 ships destroyed and over 3,000 people killed. That wasn't victory. That was failure dressed up in noble words. But Velcor pressed his point with quiet insistence. She had survived when everyone else died, and in surviving she had proved that the Zarn were not the invincible force everyone believed them to be. For 300 years the Zarn had expanded across the galaxy unchecked by any opposition. Entire civilizations had chosen extinction over surrender, because fighting back seemed hopeless. But humanity had fought them with inferior technology and made them retreat from the battlefield. That changed everything. Kate opened her eyes and studied the alien commander carefully, trying to read his intentions through the shifting colors of his skin. She asked directly what he wanted from her. What price came with the rescue and medical care? Velcor's answer was straightforward. He wanted information, cooperation, and access to her tactical knowledge. What she knew could save millions of lives across dozens of species. The Krenathi were members of something called the Galactic Council, a union of civilized species dedicated to mutual defense and prosperity. They had maintained an uneasy peace through diplomacy and deterrence, but the Zarn tested their borders constantly. The knowledge that humanity had gained through desperate battle could change the balance of power in the galaxy. Kate asked what she would get in return for this cooperation. Velcor's offer was simple but compelling. They would help her find Earth by any means necessary. They would give her sanctuary and medical care until she was fully recovered from her injuries, and they would ensure that her crew's sacrifice was remembered and honored. The Defiant would be preserved as a monument, and humanity's courage would be known throughout the galaxy. Kate processed this offer through her tactical mind, already spinning scenarios and calculating probabilities. She was one human alone among aliens, holding knowledge that could shift the fate of species she had never met. The smart play was obvious: to cooperate and leverage her position for humanity's benefit. But first, she needed information of her own. Kate asked how far they were from the Kepler 442 system where the battle had occurred, how far the Defiant had drifted before they found it. Velcor consulted with his science officer before answering that they were approximately 200 light-years from that location. The Defiant had drifted through several sectors of space before the Krenathi detected it by chance. 200 light-years from the battlefield, Kate's mind worked through the implications rapidly. Her knowledge of Earth's colonial expansion was 42 years out of date, but that distance would have put them well beyond the frontier colonies. They had jumped blind through Zarn space and gotten lucky, escaping immediate death but condemning themselves to the void. Kate asked about the data chip she had been holding when they found her. Velcor confirmed that they had reviewed its contents, which meant they knew exactly what message she had recorded. Then Velcor knew that humanity wouldn't stop fighting. Kate stated with absolute certainty. The Jarn had attacked human colonies and killed human civilians without provocation. Humans don't forgive that kind of attack, they don't forget it. And they don't stop until they've paid back every death. If Earth survived the war, they would be preparing right now for the next round of fighting. They would be building ships and weapons and training soldiers. And when humanity came back to Jarn space, they would hit harder than 12 ships ever could. Velcor's skin shifted through several colors that Kate couldn't interpret, probably indicating complex emotions or thoughts. He explained why finding Earth was so urgent. Not just to deliver Kate's warning, but to establish contact before humanity launched a military expedition that could trigger a galactic war. The Jarn had allies and protectorates and treaty partners throughout this region of space. An aggressive human expansion could destabilize everything and drag dozens of species into a conflict. Kate's response was cold and certain. Good. Let it all burn if that's what it takes for humanity to survive. She meant every word. The medical officer stepped forward, making placating gestures with multiple hands. Kate's physiology had been severely stressed by the long stasis and her old injuries. She needed rest and rehabilitation before any serious discussions could continue. But Kate was already trying to sit up again, ignoring the restraints and the screaming protests from her damaged body. She demanded to know how long until she could walk and work again. Velcor wanted her knowledge and she would give it to him, but she needed to be useful in return. She needed to matter and have a purpose, because if she stopped moving, if she let herself think too hard about everyone she had lost, she would fall apart completely. So they needed to give her a mission, a reason to keep going. Velcor studied her for a long moment with those 4 alien eyes, seeing more than Kate wanted to reveal. Finally, he made a gesture that her translator interpreted as agreement and acceptance. She would help them find Earth by providing navigational data and stellar cartography. She would advise their military strategists on Jarn tactics and human combat doctrine, and in return they would give her what every soldier truly deserves, a mission to complete and a purpose to fulfill. Kate nodded and sank back into the medical bed, exhausted but satisfied. A mission meant she could keep the ghosts at bay at least for a while longer. She told Velcor they should get started immediately, because if the Jarn were still out there, then humanity needed to know. And if there was one thing her crew had taught her through their sacrifice, it was that humans don't stay down when beaten. They get back up, they adapt to new situations, and they fight with everything they have. 3 months passed before Kate stood in the strategy center of the Krenathi research station. Her new prosthetic arm interfaced seamlessly with the holographic controls, responding to her thoughts as naturally as her original limb once had. The arm was a marvel of Krenathi bioengineering, far beyond anything humanity had developed before the war. But Kate had insisted on keeping it simple with no hidden weapons or tools, just pure functionality. The hologram before her displayed a 3-dimensional map of the local galactic arm, with thousands of star systems marked in various colors. Green indicated Galactic Council member species, red showed Jarn territory, yellow marked independent civilizations, and white represented uncharted space. There was far too much white on the map. Kate explained the problem to the assembled Krenathi strategic team with patient frustration. Humanity had been expanding in multiple directions simultaneously before the war, establishing over 30 colony worlds spread across roughly 80 light-years of space. The Defiant had been part of the Outer Rim defense fleet protecting the newest and most vulnerable settlements. She gestured at the hologram and it zoomed into a region dense with white markers. Based on stellar cartography recovered from the Defiant's database, Earth should be located somewhere in this sector. But without knowing the exact jump vector from the Kepler 442 battle, they were looking at hundreds of potential star systems to search. Velcor reported that they had dispatched scout ships to begin systematic surveys of the most likely candidates. But the process would take time, possibly years, to complete a thorough search. Kate grimaced at this timeline, years more of being separated from home and not knowing if Earth still existed. The uncertainty gnawed at her during every quiet moment when she wasn't working. Had the Jarn returned to finish what they started? Had humanity's desperate defense bought enough time for Earth to prepare proper defenses? Or had it simply delayed the inevitable extinction? The questions haunted her sleep and drove her to work harder during waking hours. Science Officer Thrain offered an alternative approach. her skin shifting to the color of careful consideration. The Defiance engine signature was unique in the Galactic database, ancient by Krenathi standards but highly distinctive. If they broadcast a message in the direction of likely human space using communication frequencies recovered from the database, there was a reasonable chance that Earth's monitoring stations could detect it and respond. Kate immediately saw the flaw in this plan and asked what would happen if the Zharn intercepted the broadcast instead. Velcor admitted that was definitely a risk they would have to accept. But the alternative was waiting decades for a comprehensive survey while humanity remained ignorant of the Defiant's fate. The tactical data Kate had shared suggested the Zharn would return to finish destroying the human colonies. They never left threats unaddressed. Kate paced the strategy center while her mind ran through scenarios and calculated probabilities. In the 3 months since waking, she had shared everything she knew about fighting the Zharn, holding nothing back. The Krenathi had been simultaneously fascinated and horrified by human combat doctrine. Fascinated by humanity's aggressive tactics and willingness to accept massive casualties to achieve strategic gains. Horrified by exactly the same things because the Krenathi were fundamentally peaceful beings, Kate made her decision with the certainty of a combat veteran. They would send the message, but encrypt it using human military protocols from before the war. If Earth survived and maintained any military structure, they would recognize the encryption immediately. The message should include the Defiant's jump data, last known position, and the research station's current coordinates. Thrain asked gently what they should do if there was no response to the broadcast. Kate didn't answer because she couldn't let herself think about that possibility, not yet. Over the following weeks, the Krenathi broadcast the message repeatedly on rotating frequencies and adjusting for potential stellar drift. Kate threw herself into work with manic intensity, helping the station's defensive teams redesign their tactics based on hard-won human experience. The Krenathi military doctrine was built around defensive positions and overwhelming technological superiority, waiting for enemies to make mistakes. Kate taught them something different, something dangerous. She taught them to be mean. During one particularly frustrating training session, Kate stopped the simulation and addressed the Krenathi officers bluntly. They were thinking like prey animals instead of predators, she told them. The Zharn expected council species to defend their positions, to fortify strong points, to wait patiently for the enemy to make tactical errors. The officers needed to stop doing exactly what the enemy expected. Kate pulled up actual combat footage from the Defiant's final battle. She pointed to a specific moment when her ship was outgunned and outmaneuvered and dying, so they did the stupidest thing possible. They rammed the enemy flagship at a significant fraction of light speed, full thrust on the engines, emergency overload on the reactors, and they crashed directly into the Zharn flagship's shield generators. The Krenathi officers made sounds of distress and disbelief. One protested that such a tactic was pure suicide with no tactical benefit. Kate corrected him firmly. That wasn't suicide but commitment to victory. And more importantly, it had worked exactly as planned. The collision took out the enemy's shields completely, which allowed the rest of the human fleet to pour devastating fire into the exposed hull. Sometimes the only way to win a battle was being willing to lose everything in the attempt. The training sessions became legendary among the station's crew over time. Stories spread about the small human who fought like she had nothing to lose. Because in many ways she truly didn't. Kate's reputation grew until other council species started sending military observers to learn from the survivor of the Defiant. It was during one such training session that the alarms suddenly went off throughout the station. Kate reached the command deck in seconds, her prosthetic arm already interfacing with the station's computer systems. She demanded an immediate report from the watch officer. An unknown vessel had just dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the extreme edge of sensor range. The configuration matched parameters for human ship design from the Defiant's database. More importantly, the vessel was broadcasting on encrypted military frequencies that matched human protocols. Kate's heart seemed to stop beating for a moment. She ordered the watch officer to get her that transmission immediately, not caring how desperate she sounded. Static filled the command deck speakers, then resolved into a voice. Human, male, speaking English with an accent that told Kate he was from one of the inner colonies near Earth. The voice identified itself as Captain Simon Blake of the TCDF Valiant. They had received the Krenathi broadcast transmission and had traveled for 2 months to reach this position. Blake was requesting immediate contact with Lieutenant Kate Morrison. They needed to know if the message was real and if she was truly alive after all these years. Kate grabbed the communication station with both hands shaking. She transmitted back her identification and service number, confirming that she was alive even though the Defiant was gone. Then she asked the only question that mattered. What was Earth's status, and had the Defiant sacrifice bought humanity enough time to survive? The pause felt eternal, stretching out for subjective hours. Then Blake's voice came back over the channel, thick with emotion that carried clearly across the light years. Earth stood strong. They had held against the Jarn return. The enemy came back 6 years after Kepler 442, and humanity was ready for them. Earth's military had been searching for Defiant survivors ever since, never giving up hope. Blake's voice was warm as he welcomed Kate home, acknowledging that she had been gone a long time but promising that humanity never stopped, searching for its own. Kate collapsed into the command chair as decades of accumulated tension finally released all at once. Around her, the Krenathi crew maintained respectful silence, understanding that this was a profound moment. The human survivor who had endured 40 years of isolation and uncertainty was finally reconnecting with her species. Kate allowed herself something she hadn't done since entering stasis. She cried openly without shame. Tears of relief and joy and grief mixed together, running down her face as the reality sank in. Earth survived, humanity endured, and Kate Morrison was finally going home. The Valiant was completely different from the Defiant in every possible way. Kate's old ship had been a converted colony transport pressed into emergency military service, carrying civilian refugees alongside soldiers and improvised weapons. The Valiant was purpose-built for war from the hull plating inward. Sleek and deadly, incorporating lessons learned from 42 years of intermittent conflict with the Jarn and their various proxy forces. Captain Blake met Kate in the docking bay with a full honor guard standing at attention. He was young, probably born after the Defiant's final battle, wearing a uniform that had evolved considerably from what Kate remembered. But his salute was sharp and precise, and his eyes held genuine respect rather than pity. Blake formally welcomed Kate aboard on behalf of the Terran Colonial Defense Force and the United Earth Government. Kate returned the salute, still adjusting to being surrounded by humans again after months among aliens. She requested permission to come aboard following proper military protocol. Blake granted permission immediately and added that having her aboard was an honor. The Defiant's last stand was required study at the military academy, he explained. Every officer learned the battle in detail. Kate was a legend to the current generation of defenders. Kate winced at hearing this. She had just been trying to survive and protect her crew. Blake led her through corridors that smelled of recycled air and human sweat, familiar scents that made Kate's chest ache with memories. Crew members stopped to stare as she passed, whispering to each other. The ghost-made flesh, the survivor returned from the dead. Blake's ready room was efficient and spare, dominated by a holographic display similar to what the Krenathi used, but with distinctly human design aesthetics. He offered Kate a seat in something that approximated coffee, though it tasted slightly wrong after 40 years of formula changes. Blake explained that he needed to debrief her thoroughly, but first he wanted Kate to understand what she was returning to. Earth had changed dramatically since she entered stasis. The war with the Jarn was cold now rather than hot, a tense standoff instead of active combat. Humanity had established defensive pacts with a dozen species, including the Krenathi. Against all odds, Earth was now a member of the Galactic Council. Kate couldn't keep the surprise from her voice as she repeated this. Humanity joined the Council, the same council that had apparently ignored the Jarn threat for centuries. Blake nodded and explained that Earth had no choice in the matter. The galaxy turned out to be far more complicated than anyone realized during the early colonial period. The Jarn were dangerous, but they weren't the only threat out there. Ancient species lurked in deep space. Territorial disputes erupted constantly. Political factions schemed against each other. Humanity needed allies to survive in this environment. But Blake's expression showed pride as he added that Earth also built the largest military fleet in Council space. Nobody pushed humanity around anymore, not after what happened at Kepler 442. Kate absorbed this information slowly, trying to reconcile the Earth she remembered with the interstellar power Blake described. She asked about the colonies that the Jarn had attacked. the settlements the Defiant had been defending. Blake's expression darkened as he delivered the painful news. 3 colonies were completely destroyed before Earth stopped the Jarn advance. Kepler 442, New Harmony, and Terra Nova were gone. Everyone killed or missing. Humanity had built memorials for the dead, but those worlds were lifeless now. However, most of the civilians from the Outer Rim settlements had been evacuated in time. The families Kate and her crew had been protecting, the people they died defending. The majority of them survived because the Defiant bought them enough time to escape. The guilt Kate had carried for 42 years eased slightly at this news. Not gone completely, never truly gone, but bearable now. She needed to know about her crew's families and the casualties from the Defiant. Blake assured her that everything was already arranged. She would have full access to survivor records and memorial services. But there was more to discuss. Blake leaned forward with intensity. The Krenathi had been sharing their research on Kate's tactical innovations and adaptive strategies. Earth Command wanted her back in active service, not on the front lines, but as a strategic advisor. Her combat experience against the Jarn was invaluable to the entire defense force. Kate laughed at the suggestion, but the sound came out bitter and tired. She pointed out the obvious problems with Blake's proposal. She was a 42-year relic in a body that barely functioned, missing an arm and carrying injuries that would never fully heal. She had nightmares about battles that current recruits studied as ancient history. She had spent 3 months teaching aliens how to fight dirty. What made anyone think she was fit for duty in this new era? Blake's response was simple and direct. Kate survived when everyone else died. She stayed alive long enough to deliver the warning that saved millions. She had already proven that humans adapt better than anyone else in the galaxy. Earth needed that quality, especially now with the Jarn building something new in their territory. Intelligence suggested another war was coming, and humanity needed veterans who had faced the enemy and lived. Kate stared at the coffee substitute in her cup, watching steam rise while she considered the offer. A mission and a purpose, the same thing she had requested from the Krenathi. Now her own species was offering exactly that. She asked what the specific assignment would be. Blake pulled up a star chart showing multiple sectors and fleet positions. Earth was establishing a joint defense initiative with the Krenathi and 3 other council species. Combined fleet operations, shared intelligence networks, coordinated response protocols for Jarn incursions. Kate would head the Human Tactical Advisory Team, working directly with alien strategists from multiple species. Essentially, she would be doing what she did on the Krenathi station, but on a galactic scale instead of local. Kate summarized the assignment bluntly. Teaching the galaxy to fight like humans, spreading Earth's aggressive combat doctrine to species that preferred defensive warfare. Blake corrected her gently but firmly. Teaching them to survive like humans, there was an important difference. Survival meant adaptation, flexibility, willingness to take risks. Fighting was just one tool among many. Kate thought about the Defiant's crew and their desperate last stand at Kepler 442. She thought about 42 years of silence and darkness in stasis. She thought about Earth standing strong because her crew bought time with their blood and sacrifice. Finally, she made her decision. Kate agreed to take the assignment but demanded one condition first. Blake told her to name it. The Defiant needed its memorial with full military honors for every single crew member. She wanted their names permanently recorded, their stories told truthfully, their sacrifice recognized. They hadn't died in vain, and Kate needed the whole galaxy to know that. Blake smiled at her condition and told her it was already done. The Defiant Monument on Luna received over 1 million visitors every year. Kate's crew was famous throughout human space, celebrated as heroes of the first battle. School children learned their names, military recruits studied their tactics, civilian populations honored their memory. Kate felt something break inside her, some final wall she had maintained for 4 decades finally crumbling. The tears came again, but differently this time. Not pure grief, but a complex mixture of relief and pride, and the bone-deep satisfaction of knowing her people had been properly remembered. Her voice was steady when she confirmed her acceptance. She was in, ready to get to work immediately. 3 days later, Kate stood before the viewport in her new quarters aboard the Valiant, watching stars streak past as the ship accelerated toward Earth at faster-than-light speeds. Commander Velkor's face appeared on the communication screen behind her. Velkor transmitted that the Krenathi delegation wished Kate well in her new assignment. She had taught them much about resilience and adaptation, and they were grateful for her assistance. They looked forward to working with her again in the Joint Defense Initiative. Kate thanked him sincerely for everything, for giving her a reason to keep fighting when she had lost everything else. Velkor's skin shifted through several warm colors as he responded. Kate had honored them with her trust and taught an important lesson about humanity. Humans don't simply survive adversity, they thrive in it. They turn obstacles into opportunities for growth. The galaxy was fortunate that Earth chose cooperation over isolation. After the transmission ended, Kate remained at the viewport alone with her thoughts. Somewhere ahead, still days away even at faster-than-light speeds, was Earth. Home had changed beyond recognition, but it still stood, still human, still fighting for survival. The Defiance crew hadn't died in vain. Their sacrifice bought time for Earth to prepare and adapt and become stronger. Now Kate would carry their legacy forward, teaching the galaxy what humanity learned through fire and blood and desperate last stands. She raised her prosthetic hand to the viewport with fingers splayed against the endless stars beyond. She whispered to the ghost she would always carry with her. They made it. They finally made it home. Behind her on the desk, mission briefings waited for her attention. Tactical analyses of current Zarn movements, strategic projections for the